My alpha left me to die as a pregnant merman. Now he begs to see our son. The air in the penthouse tasted like expensive scotch and the metallic tang of blood, the permanent cologne of a killer. My lungs burned. In my previous life, this was the moment I had died. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly, suffocating on my own heart while the man who owned it walked out the door without a backward glance. I remembered the way I had knelt on this very carpet, clutching at the hem of his charcoal coat, begging him to stay, begging him to care. I had told him about the life growing inside me, thinking, praying, that the news would anchor him to me. It hadn't. He had looked at me with those cold gray eyes, and he had left anyway. That Omega was dead. The boy who had withered away in a cramped basement apartment, hiding his scales from the sun and his tears from the world, had drawn his final breath. I opened my eyes and found myself staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, the one overlooking the city harbor, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the dying light like fire. Beside me, the bed was cold. The sliding door to the balcony hung open, letting in the sharp, salty breeze that stirred the expensive sheets. My body felt different. Lighter. Stronger. The phantom ache of a botched pregnancy and years of malnutrition had vanished, replaced by a humming, thrumming vitality that sang through my veins like a tide pulling toward the moon. I pressed a hand to my stomach. Flat, firm, but beneath the surface of my skin, I could feel it, a tiny, fierce spark of life. Still there. Still mine. Not this time, I thought. You will not die in the dark this time. Cash in. The voice was low, a jagged rasp that used to make my knees buckle. Now it only made the scales beneath my skin itch with warning. I sat up slowly. Damon Cale stood by the balcony door, his silhouette cutting a sharp, lethal line against the city lights. He was dressed in tactical black, his gloves still faintly stained with whatever work he had finished that night. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his dark hair falling across a brow that had never once furrowed over me. He was an alpha in every sense of the word, dominant, ruthless, and utterly incapable of staying. Beautiful in the way a hurricane was beautiful. Destructive and indifferent. The mission has changed, he said, not looking at me. His voice held that flat, clinical tone, the one he used when he was delivering news he expected me to crumble under. It's too dangerous for you to be near me. I've cleared the accounts. There's enough for you to live comfortably for a few years. In my first life, I had screamed. I had crawled across that bed, naked and trembling, and wrapped my arms around his waist. I had sobbed into his spine, told him about the child, promised to wait forever, to be whatever he needed, to shrink myself down until I was small enough to fit into the corners of his life. I had offered him everything, and he had stepped over me like I was furniture. This time, I didn't even stand up. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and felt the cool marble floor beneath my feet. The silk pajamas he had bought me, the ones that matched his, the ones that made me look like a pretty accessory, hung loose on my frame. I didn't bother adjusting them. I looked at the alpha I had once worshipped. It felt nothing but cold, crystalline clarity. Okay, I said. Damon paused. He turned his head slightly, his brow furrowing. That single twitch of muscle was the most emotion I had seen from him in months. He had expected a breakdown. He had braced himself for the guilt of my tears, the weight of my begging. He had not braced for indifference. Cash in. I said okay. I stood up, stretching my limbs. The movement was fluid, predatory, in a way I had never allowed myself to move in front of him before. I could feel the magic humming beneath my skin, the latent power of the deep ocean calling to be used. Pack the rest of your things. Or don't. Anything left here by dawn goes into the incinerator. Damon stepped toward me. For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually touch me. His hand lifted, hovering near my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his palm. It's for your safety, he said. If the syndicate finds out about you, don't. My voice cut through his excuses like a blade through water, clean, sharp, and absolutely final. Don't look back on your way out, Damon. My door only opens one way, and you just step through the exit. You're being emotional, he muttered, though his eyes betrayed him. They were confused, unsettled. He was used to me being his anchor, the soft place he returned to after a kill, the warm body that waited without question. He had never seen me stand. No. A small, sharp smile tugged at the corner of my lips, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'm being rational for the first time in 2 lives. You chose your path. I'm choosing mine. And in mine, you don't exist. I walked past him toward the bathroom. I didn't glance back. I didn't wobble. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing even a flicker of the desperate, lovesick Omega I had been. Behind me, I heard his heartbeat stutter, fast, erratic, wrong for an assassin who prided himself on a pulse that never rose above 60. Good. I locked the bathroom door and turned on the shower, letting the steam fill the room. The mirror fogged, obscuring my reflection, but I didn't need to see myself. I already knew what I would find. I stripped off the silk pajamas, the pretty cage clothes he had bought to dress me up like a doll, and stepped under the water. The moment the droplets hit my skin, I felt the familiar shimmer. My legs didn't give way to a tail, not yet. I was too far from the salt of the sea for that. But my skin took on an iridescent sheen, midnight blue and silver, rippling across my arms like scales beneath the surface. Tough, flawless, predatory. I pressed both hands to my stomach. The life inside me stirred, a tiny flutter, no bigger than a heartbeat. I won't let you grow up in a cage, I whispered in the silent language of our kind, the language that traveled through water and blood and bone. You will be born in the tide. You will be a prince of the sea. Not the secret of a murderer. 20 minutes later, when I stepped out of the bathroom, the penthouse was silent. The balcony door was shut. The comfortable amount of money was sitting on the nightstand, a thick envelope, and a black titanium credit card with no name on it. In my last life, I had left it there. I had been too proud, too desperate to prove I didn't need his blood money. I'd ended up starving in a basement, selling my grandmother's jewelry just to afford prenatal vitamins. I looked at the envelope now. I didn't feel pride. I felt calculation. You want to pay for your disappearance? I murmured, picking up the envelope. I flicked through the bills, hundreds, all sequential, all untraceable. Consider this the down payment on the 2 years of my life you're about to lose. I didn't just take the cash. I took the black card, too. If Damon Cale wanted to fund a comfortable life, I was going to make damn sure it was the life of a king. Every cent would go toward the finest ingredients, the best education for my child, and the most secure property on the coast. I went to the walk-in closet and pulled out a simple duffel bag, the one I had packed in secret during my first life, the one that had stayed hidden behind my winter coats while I waited for a sign that never came. I packed my knives, the professional culinary set I had hidden away, because Damon didn't like the noise of me working. The clattering of pans, the late hours, the attention I received when people tasted my food. He had wanted me small, invisible. I also packed my documents, the ones that proved I existed, even when he had tried to erase me. I walked to the balcony and looked out toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, 300 miles north, was a coastal town called Salt Whisper Cove. It had a 5-star resort, a kitchen that needed a master, and an ocean that would keep me strong. I picked up the burner phone Damon had left for emergencies, the one he expected me to keep clutched in my sweaty palm, waiting for a call that would never come. I didn't drop it in the scotch this time. I placed it on a floor directly under the heavy heel of my boot and crushed it until the circuit board snapped and the screen went black. Goodbye, Damon. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave a trace. By the time the sun began to bleed over the Atlantic, I was already behind the wheel of his high-performance SUV, the one he never let me drive, the one I had hot-wired with trembling fingers in my first life and abandoned because I was too afraid of what he would do when he found out. This time, I didn't tremble. This time I drove. The drive to Salt Whisper Cove was a blur of highway lights and the rhythmic thrum of the engine. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been. In my first life, I had made this journey in the back seat of a Greyhound bus, clutching a worn-out ultrasound photo and sobbing until my eyes were swollen shut. I had arrived in Salt Whisper Cove with $73, a broken heart, and a belly that was already beginning to show. This time, I drove Damon's SUV with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the thick envelope of cash in my lap. I didn't head for the cheap motels on the outskirts of town. I drove straight to the heart of the coastal district, where the air tasted of brine and expensive perfume, where the buildings were made of glass and stone instead of rotting wood and desperation. The Azure Resort rose from the cliffs like a monument to excess, all white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows, with a private beach that curved around a natural cove like a crescent moon. I checked in under a false name, Elias Vane, and handed over the black card without flinching. The concierge, a beta woman with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones, didn't even blink at the name. She simply smiled, processed the payment, and handed me the keys to a private seaside villa at the edge of the property. "Will you be needing anything else, Mr. Vane?" "No," I said. "I have everything I need." The first few weeks were a battle of biology. Omega Merman pregnancy is demanding, primal. On land, it feels like your very marrow is drying out, like your body is slowly turning to dust while the life inside you drinks down everything you have to give. The human world is too loud, too dry, too still. I had chosen Salt Whisper Cove for a reason. The cove itself was sheltered, hidden from the main resort by a curtain of rock and sea grape trees. The water was deep enough to dive in, cold enough to keep my scales strong, and private enough that no one would see what I really was. Every morning, before the sun had even kissed the horizon, I walked down to the private strip of beach. My skin would be itching by then, a crawling, burning sensation that started at the base of my spine and spread outward until I felt like I was wearing a suit made of fire. My scales would be humming beneath the surface, a trapped current begging to be released. I would strip off my clothes, the loose linen pants, the oversized sweater, the silk underwear that cost more than my first apartment, and dive into the freezing Atlantic. The moment the salt water hit my skin, the transformation was violent and beautiful. My legs fused together, the bones softening and reshaping into a powerful muscular tail. My skin hardened into iridescent midnight blue scales, the color of the deep ocean, the color of my mother's eyes before she disappeared into the waves and never came back. My lungs opened, filtering oxygen from the water like I had been born to do it. I dove deep, down where the pressure was enough to crush a human chest, down where the light faded to a dim, shimmering memory, down where the only sounds were the rush of currents and the distant song of whales. And there, in the silence, I let the water nourish the life inside me. I didn't hunt for sport, I hunted for nutrients. The Omega body craved iron and protein and minerals that human food couldn't provide. I ate raw silver-scaled fish, tearing into the flesh with teeth that had sharpened to points. I swallowed mineral-rich kelp, feeling the strength return to my limbs. I drank in the salt itself, letting it balance the chemistry of my blood. When I finally dragged myself back onto the sand an hour later, I wasn't the frail Omega Damon remembered. I was a siren. By the second month, the blood money was being put to work. I didn't just want a job. I wanted a throne. The culinary world was brutal, especially for an Omega. Chefs were alphas, mostly. The kitchens were run like military operations, with screaming head chefs and line cooks who moved like soldiers. Omegas who entered that world were usually relegated to pastry, soft, sweet, safe. I had never been safe. I began by entering the local underground culinary circuits. Salt Whisper Cove was a playground for the elite, billionaires, tech moguls, the kind of people who owned private islands and didn't blink at a $5,000 bottle of wine. And they were bored. They wanted something new, something dangerous. I gave it to them. The competition was held in a converted warehouse on the edge of the cove, a black box event hosted by a retiring five-star chef who was looking for his successor. The room was filled with the sharp scent of citrus and searing meat, the clatter of knives on cutting boards, the low murmur of judges who had tasted everything and been impressed by nothing. The other contestants were young, arrogant alphas, fresh out of culinary schools in Paris and New York, their knives imported from Japan, their egos polished to a mirror shine. They looked at my damp hair, my quiet demeanor, the loose black sweater that hid the subtle curve of my belly. They dismissed me. Then I started to cook. I didn't use the standard techniques they taught in schools. I used instincts, the instincts of a creature that had spent centuries watching the sea, learning its rhythms, understanding its gifts. I deboned a bluefin tuna with a single fluid motion that looked more like surgery than butchery. The alpha next to me stopped breathing. I seasoned with sea salts. I had harvested myself from the deep trenches, salts that carry the memory of shipwrecks and moonlight, of pressure and darkness and ancient things that had never seen the sun. I plated the ceviche on a bed of crushed ice shaped like a wave, garnished it with edible flowers that glowed faintly in the dim light, and stepped back. The head judge, an alpha with silver hair and eyes that had seen everything, picked up his fork with a hand that trembled. He took one bite. The room went silent. I watched his face change, the way his pupils dilated, the way his breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just tasting the food. He was being haunted by it. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Elias Vane," I said, wiping my blade clean on a towel. "And I'm the reason your hotel's restaurant is going to be the only one that matters by next season." I got the job. The Azure's restaurant was called Tide. It was a beautiful space, all glass and steel, built out over the water so that diners could watch the waves crash beneath their feet. But the food was safe, boring. The kind of menu that appealed to tourists who wanted to say they'd eaten at a five-star restaurant without actually experiencing anything. I changed everything within a month. I fired half the staff, the ones who looked at me with those barely hidden sneers, the ones who whispered omega like it was a curse word. I replaced them with betas and omegas who were hungry, starving, for someone to believe in them. I rewrote the menu from scratch. No more safe options. No more, if you don't like it, we can make you something else. You ate what I gave you, or you left. And they stayed. The reviews came in like a tidal wave. The most daring restaurant on the eastern seaboard. Elias Vane is a culinary genius. Michelin stars are imminent. I didn't read them. I didn't have time. Because by the 5th month, the pregnancy began to take its toll in ways I hadn't expected. The dryness became unbearable. I was running the kitchen at Tide by day, barking orders, perfecting menus, maintaining a physical presence that commanded respect from alphas twice my size. But by night, I was collapsing in my bathroom, my skin cracking, my fever spiking, my omega instinct screaming at me to find safety, to find a nest, a den, an alpha who would hold me and tell me everything was going to be okay. But the only alpha I had ever wanted was 300 miles away, probably elbow deep in someone else's blood, not even remembering my name. The staff noticed things. They noticed that I drank gallons of mineral water, more than any human should be able to hold. They noticed that I never let anyone touch me, that I flinched away from casual contact like it burned. They noticed that I disappeared into the walk-in freezer for 10 minutes at a time, pressing my burning forehead against the ice, whispering to the child inside me to stay strong. They chalked it up to the eccentricity of a genius. They didn't see me in my villa at 3 a.m., curled in the bathtub with the salt water running, my scales half emerged, my body trembling with a heat that had nothing to do with fever and everything to do with need. Omegas in the final stages of pregnancy were supposed to be surrounded by their pack. Scented, nested, held. I had no pack. I had no alpha. I had no one but myself and the tiny life kicking against my ribs. Just a little longer, I whispered to them, because I had finally admitted to myself that I was carrying a son. Just a little longer, and we'll be safe. The most difficult night came during a hurricane. The pressure drop sent my Merman instincts into a frenzy. The ocean was calling, a deep primal song that vibrated through my bones and demanded that I return to the water, that I give birth where I belonged. Contractions started early. Sharp, jagged pains that felt like hooks in my gut, twisting and pulling and tearing. I was alone in my villa. The power was out. The waves were crashing against the cliffs below, so loud that I couldn't hear my own screams. In my first life, I would have called Damon. I would have dialed his number with shaking fingers, would have sobbed into the phone, would have begged him to come save me, to hold my hand, to tell me it was going to be okay, to be there for once in his goddamn life. He wouldn't have answered. He never answered. This time, I didn't even reach for the phone. I crawled to the bathroom floor, clutching the edge of the marble tub, and bit down on a rolled-up towel to keep from screaming. I didn't need a savior. I needed to survive. I dragged myself into the water, cold, blessedly cold, and let it overflow onto the floor. The salt stung my skin, but it also healed, pulling the fever out of my veins, easing the burning in my muscles. I focused every ounce of my will on the heartbeat inside me. Not yet, I commanded, my voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the water. We aren't ready. We have a world to take. The pain lasted for 12 hours. 12 hours of waves crashing against the villa walls. 12 hours of contractions that felt like my body was being torn apart from the inside. 12 hours of singing, low, subsonic, primal, to the child who was fighting to be born. When the storm finally cleared, I was exhausted, bruised, shivering so violently that my teeth chattered. But the child was safe. I stood up on trembling legs, wrapped myself in a robe, and went to work. I had a lunch rush to lead. By the 9th month, I had successfully hidden the pregnancy behind custom-tailored, oversized chef's whites and a reputation for being untouchable. No one dared question the executive chef of Tide. No one asked why I wore loose jackets, even in the heat of the kitchen. No one asked why I disappeared for hours at a time, returning with damp hair and the faint smell of salt on my skin. They just cooked. And I just watched, waiting, counting down the days until I could finally meet the life I had been protecting for so long. I gave birth in the ocean. It was the only way. The moon was full, a silver coin suspended over the Atlantic, casting rippling light across the surface of the water. I swam out past the breakers, past the point where the beach dropped off into darkness, into the calm moonlit cradle of the hidden cove. There were no doctors, no monitors, no sterile hospital smells. There was only the salt, the moon, and the ancient song of my people, the one my mother had sung to me, and her mother before her, stretching back through generations of mere people who had given birth in the arms of the sea. When the child finally emerged, slipping out of me in a rush of water and blood and light, he didn't cry. He opened his eyes, deep, oceanic, blue, and immediately reached for the water. He had tiny, shimmering scales at his temples and along his spine, scales that caught the moonlight and scattered it like diamonds. They faded as he took his first breath of air, retreating beneath the surface of his skin, waiting for the day he would return to the sea. I held him against my chest, his small heart beating against mine, and felt something crack open inside me. Not the ice around my heart, that had already started to melt months ago, in ways I didn't want to examine. Something else, something softer. You are Kalen, I whispered, the name I had chosen months ago, alone in my villa, whispering it to my belly in the dark. And you will never know the sin of gunpowder. You will only know the sea. I walked back onto the shore, the child wrapped in my shirt, and looked back at the dark horizon. I had built my fortress. I had my heir. All I had to do now was wait for the ghost of my past to try and find us. The manifesto arrived on a Tuesday. It was a heavy, leather-bound folder that sat on my stainless steel prep table like a ticking bomb. In the world of five-star hospitality, names were more than labels. They were blueprints. For disaster. Or for success. I was leaning against the counter, the sharp scent of rosemary and lemon oil clinging to my skin. Behind me, the kitchen was a choreographed dance of silver and fire, my sous chefs moving with precision, aware that my eyes and my standards were unforgiving. I flipped the page and stopped breathing. The entry was near the bottom, listed under a shell corporation I recognized only because of the bitter hours I'd spent in my previous life helping him scrub his digital trail. Yes, Damon Kale. Stay, 30 days. Security clearance, level alpha. Private contractor. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt as dry as the desert. For a second, the phantom smell of scotch and gunpowder filled my nostrils, threatening to drown out the aroma of the sea bass I had just searing. My hand tightened on the edge of the folder, my knuckles going white. Chef? Is there a problem with the dietary restrictions for the summit? It was Marcus, my lead saucier, a beta with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, one of the few people in the kitchen who had earned my trust. He was looking at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. I realized I had been staring at the page for nearly a minute. No. My voice dropped into that low, resonant frequency, the one that always brought the room to a hush. I closed the folder with a sharp thud. Just a ghost from a past life. Carry on. I walked out of the kitchen, through the back service door, needing the air of the herb garden to clear the static from my head. The garden was a lush, hidden sanctuary perched on the cliffside, overlooking the crashing surf. In the center of the greenery sat a custom-built, saltwater-filtered pool, essentially a high-end fountain that I had converted into a play area. Callan was there. He was 18 months old now, a toddler with a mop of dark hair and eyes that changed from blue to gray, depending on the tide. He was splashing in the pool with a ferocity that would have alarmed a normal parent. His nanny, a beta woman named Sarah who had been with us since his birth, stood nearby, watching, always watching, her hand resting casually on the concealed weapon at her hip. Callan didn't see me yet. He was busy trying to catch a stray crab that had wandered too close to the water's edge. His movements were too fast for a human toddler, fluid, predatory, graceful. When he lunged, his fingers seemed to shimmer for a split second, the light catching the faint, vestigial scales that only appeared when he was excited. Callan. He froze. His head whipped around. When he saw me, his entire face transformed. He didn't just smile, he beamed with a fierce, possessive joy that made my chest ache. He scrambled out of the water, dripping wet, and barreled toward me. Dada. I knelt, catching him in my arms. He was heavy, denser than a human child, his muscles already strong and compact, a merman's weight even when he looked like a normal toddler. He smelled like salt and sunshine in mine. I buried my face in his neck, the terror of Damon's name on that list slowly being replaced by a cold, protective rage. You're all wet, little shark, I murmured, pulling back to look at him. Callan reached up, his small, damp hand patting my cheek. He looked at me with a startlingly intelligent gaze, his brow furrowing, as if he could sense the shift in my energy, the spike of adrenaline that still lingered in my blood. He let out a small, low sound, a vibration in his throat that sounded like the purr of a leopard. It was a siren's instinct, a way of asking, who do I need to hunt for you? Nothing. I kissed his forehead. Just a man who thinks he can walk back through a door I've already locked. I stood up, holding Callan against my hip, and looked out over the ocean. The very water that had shaped us. In my first life, I would have packed my bags the moment I saw that name. I would have run until my legs gave out, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the inevitable moment he found me and broke me again. But this was the second life. I had the money. I had the reputation. And most importantly, I had the power of the deep. Damon Cale was coming here as a guest. He was coming into my house, where I knew every corridor, every hidden cove, every ingredient that could be used as a weapon. He was a world-class assassin, an alpha trained to spot a threat from a mile away. But he was expecting the cash-in he had abandoned. A broken, pleading Omega who couldn't survive without his shadow. He wasn't expecting the executive chef of Tide, a siren who had built an empire from the ashes of his betrayal. An Omega who had learned to hunt. We stay, Callan. My voice was cold, colder than the deep trenches, colder than the winter waves. Let him come. Let him see what he threw away. And let him realize that this time, he's the one who's out of his depth. I walked back inside, the weight of my son in my arms a reminder of exactly what was at stake. I had 3 days until the summit began. 3 days to perfect my menu. And my trap. The dining room of Tide was a sea of black ties and hushed, lethal conversations. The contractors, Damon's people, the syndicate's people, were men who lived in the silence between heartbeats. They sat with their backs to the wall, eyes scanning the exits, their presence turning the five-star luxury into something cold and transactional. I stood behind the heavy oak doors of the kitchen, adjusting my white double-breasted coat. My hair was swept back, damp, sleek, the way I always wore it when I knew I would be near the water. My posture was a straight, uncompromising line. I could feel the hum of the ocean through the floorboards, the grounding pulse that reminded me who I was. Predator. Chef, the primary table is ready for the presentation. Marcus appeared at my elbow, holding the silver dome that concealed the first course. His expression was neutral, but I could see the question in his eyes. Are you ready for this? I took the dome. My hands didn't shake. Tell the servers to stay clear of table 7, I said. I'll be handling that table personally. Marcus nodded once and melted back into the chaos of the kitchen. I pushed through the doors. The transition from the heat of the kitchen to the air-conditioned elegance of the dining room was seamless. I moved with a fluid, predatory grace that commanded the attention of every professional in the room. I wasn't just a servant. I was the architect of the evening. And then I saw him. Damon Cale was sitting at the center table, table 7, flanked by 2 men who looked like they were made of granite. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, looking every bit the wealthy aristocrat he pretended to be. He was mid-sentence, his head tilted in that arrogant, bored way I used to find so alluring. Then he smelled air. I saw the exact moment his instincts flared. His nostrils flared. His body went rigid. He didn't turn his head, not at first. He was an assassin. He searched for the source of the threat with his peripheral vision first. But the scent was unmistakable. The sharp, crystalline smell of the deep Atlantic, and the underlying warmth of cedar and wild honey. My scent, the one he had spent years drowning in, the one he had abandoned without a backward glance. I reached the table and stopped. Good evening, gentlemen. My voice was low, carrying that hypnotic siren frequency that seemed to make the very glassware on the table vibrate. Damon finally looked up. The color drained from his face so quickly it was as if I'd opened a vein. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, widened until they looked shattered. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost rise from the grave and demand a seat at the table. I'm Elias Vane, I continued, my gaze locking onto his with the force of a tidal wave. I didn't smile. I didn't show a flicker of recognition. I looked at him like he was a moderately interesting piece of produce I was evaluating for a stew. Executive Chef of Tide, I prepared a specialty for your table tonight, a deep-sea ceviche, harvested from the trenches just off this coast. I lifted the silver dome. The scent of salt and lime bloomed between us, sharp, clean, dangerous. Damon's hand moved instinctively toward his inner jacket, reaching for a weapon he shouldn't have been carrying. But he stopped himself, his fingers trembling against the silk of his tie. Cashin, he breathed. The word was a broken prayer, barely audible over the clink of silverware. I ignored the question entirely. I stepped closer, leaning in just enough so that only he could hear the ice in my tone. The salinity is quite high tonight, Mr. Cale, I murmured. I suggest you stay hydrated. It's a dry world for those who don't belong in the water. I straightened up, giving a curt, professional nod to the other men at the table. Enjoy your meal. If there are any complaints, I'll be in the kitchen. I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel his gaze burning into the center of my shoulder blades, a mixture of shock, longing, and a dawning, terrifying realization. He had expected to find a man he could pay off, or apologize to. He had found a king, who looked at him with nothing but a professional's indifference. I felt his presence long before I saw him. Working the line at Tide required a level of focus most people couldn't fathom. But my Omega senses were heightened, sharpened by the humidity of the kitchen, by the hormones still lingering from the pregnancy, by the primal awareness that an alpha was nearby. Beneath the smell of searing scallops and reduction sauces, I caught the sharp, unwanted scent of gunpowder and expensive tobacco. Damon was watching from the darkened gallery above, a ghost lingering in the rafters. In our apartment, I had been a soft thing, a creature of silk sheets and quiet smiles, who lived and breathed for his return. I had scented his clothes when he was gone, had slept in his side of the bed, had marked myself with his cologne just to feel close to him. I knew he was looking down now at a stranger. I moved with a rhythmic, terrifying efficiency, commanding my brigade with nothing more than a flick of my wrist, a raised eyebrow, a quiet word that sent alphas twice my size scrambling to correct their mistakes. I saw him shift in the shadows, and I knew what he was seeing. An Omega who was powerful, corded with the muscle of working on his feet 12 hours a day, entirely complete without him. When the shift ended, when the last plate went out and the last guest stumbled toward the valet, I stripped off my heavy white coat and headed for the secluded cliffside garden. Sarah was already there, sitting on a stone bench with Kaelin in her lap. Her gaze scanned the perimeter with a professional intensity that made even the shadows nervous. "Is he ready for bed?" I asked as I approached. "Almost, chef," she replied, her voice respectful but familiar. "He's been asking for the water." I took Kaelin from her and felt the air in the garden hitch. Damon was behind a stone pillar, maybe 20 feet away. His heart was hammering, a frantic rhythm I could practically hear, even from this distance. The assassin who prided himself on a pulse that never rose above 60 was panicking. I didn't acknowledge him. I carried Kaelin to the saltwater fountain and set him down at the edge. In the moonlight, my son moved with that unmistakable Merman fluidity, too fast, too graceful, his small hands splashing in the water with a primal joy. "Dada," he giggled, kicking his feet. "Fish." "Yes, little shark," I murmured, crouching beside him. "Fish." The shadows shifted. Damon stepped out from behind the pillar. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, his jaw shadowed with stubble. The perfect, controlled mask he wore like armor had cracked, and beneath it was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Elias. Sarah was on her feet in a heartbeat, her hand dipping into her apron where her weapon sat concealed. She didn't draw, not yet, but her body was coiled, ready. I didn't flinch. I simply placed a hand on her arm, a silent signal to stand down. "You've been lurking for 3 hours, Damon." My voice was cold, colder than the deep-sea current. "It's pathetic, even for you." Damon ignored the jab. His eyes were locked on Kaelin. "He's mine." It wasn't a question. "He's mine," I corrected. My voice was flat. "And I told you, that door only opens one way. You walked through the exit 300 miles ago." Damon took a step forward, impulsive, wrong for a man who calculated every movement. His hands were trembling. The alpha who had faced down warlords and walked away without a scratch looked at my son and shattered. "I didn't know, Cashin." His voice cracked. "I swear on my life, I didn't know you were pregnant." "I didn't know." "You didn't ask." The words cut through the night like a blade. Damon's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No sound came out. He knelt. Damon Kael, the most dangerous alpha in the syndicate, knelt, trying to make himself smaller, trying to look like something other than a killer. "Kaelin," he said softly, trying out the name. "That's his name." He reached out a hand. The reaction was instantaneous and horrifying. Kaelin didn't shy away like a human child. His pupils dilated until his eyes were vast, black voids. His small chest puffed out, and he let out a sound that tore through the quiet night, a piercing high-frequency shriek that vibrated in my very teeth. It was a siren's distress call, a primal warning to a predator. As Damon's fingers came within inches of his face, Kaelin hissed, a deep guttural sound, and lashed out. His tiny fingernails, which grew sharp and thick when he was agitated, caught the back of Damon's hand. 3 beads of bright, red blood bloomed across the alpha's skin. Kaelin scrambled back into the fountain, half submerging himself, his small body shaking as he stared at Damon with pure, unadulterated terror. "Step back." I stepped between them, my own eyes shimmering with that iridescent, predatory light. My Omega instincts, the ones that had been dormant since I left Damon's penthouse, roared to life, screaming at me to protect. "Sarah, take him inside." "Now." Sarah moved with practiced speed, scooping a dripping, hissing Kaelin into her arms and disappearing into the hotel's rear entrance. Damon stayed on his knees. He was staring at the blood on his hand, at the 3 thin lines that marked where his own son had rejected him. "He's afraid of me." His voice was hollow. My own son thinks I'm a monster. You are a monster, Damon. I looked down at him with a devastating lack of pity. You smell like the blood of 100 men. You smell like gunpowder and death and things that hunt in the dark. He's a creature of instinct. He sees exactly what you are. Even if I was once too blind to see it, I'll change. Damon looked up at me, his gray eyes shattered, raw in a way I had never seen before. I'll do anything. I'll walk away from the syndicate tonight. I'll burn every bridge, kill every connection. You think it's that easy? I stepped closer, my voice dropping into a low, dangerous hum. You broke his heart before he was even born, Damon. You left me alone, pregnant, terrified, dying, in a basement apartment while you went off to play soldier. You don't get to walk back in just because you've decided you're lonely. I turned away from him. If you want a place in this world, you'll have to earn it. From the bottom. And right now, you're beneath the tide. I walked toward the villa. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Damon's breath catch a small broken sound that the old me would have drowned in. The new me just kept walking. I carried Kalen back into our villa, his small wet body still trembling against my chest. Inside, the air was conditioned and filtered, but I could still feel the phantom heat of Damon's presence lingering on my skin. Bed, Kalen whimpered, his voice a tiny, wet rasp. His eyes were still that midnight black, a sign that his nervous system was stuck in predator mode. I know, a little shark. I know. I sat on the edge of the large, circular tub in our master suite. I didn't turn on the lights. Mermen see better in the dark anyway. I let the saltwater tap run, filling the basin with the mineral-rich water Kalen needed to calm his scales. I held him in the water, humming the low, subsonic melody I had sung to him when he was just a heartbeat in my womb. Slowly, the tension left his limbs. His pupils began to shrink, revealing the soft, oceanic blue underneath. He fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, exhausted by the sheer force of his own instinct. Sarah stood by the doorway, a silent shadow. He's still out there, she said quietly. Hasn't moved from the archway. Let him stay. My voice was cold. Let him realize that the only thing he's guarding is a door that won't open for him. But Damon didn't just stay. He began to move. Over the next 3 days, a strange silence fell over the azure. The summit was in full swing, and usually that meant dealing with the egos of men who thought they owned the world. But the incidents I expected never reached my kitchen. Instead, I heard the whispers from the staff. The loudmouth contractor who had been harassing my pastry chef, he slipped in the gym, shattered his jaw so badly he had to be airlifted out. The group of Russian lobbyists who had been trying to bribe the concierge for the floor plans of the executive villa, they were found bound and gagged in a supply closet. Their reputations ruined. Their security clearances revoked. No one died, but everyone noticed. By noon of the third day, I stood in my office, looking at the security footage Damon didn't know I could access. He moved through the hotel like a glitch in the Matrix, a blur of gray and shadow, present 1 second and gone the next. He wasn't killing anyone. I had made it clear I wouldn't tolerate his work in my home, but he was dismantling them, using his lethal skill set to create a vacuum around me and Kalen, trying to prove that, even if I didn't want him, I needed his shadow. On the 4th night, I walked out to the herb garden after the dinner rush. The air was crisp. The scent of rosemary was overwhelming, but beneath it, I caught something else. Something metallic. I found Damon sitting on the stone wall by the cliff's edge. He looked terrible. His suit was gone, replaced by tactical black gear that was scuffed and stained. He had a deep bruise along his cheekbone, and his hands, those steady killer's hands, were wrapped in blood-stained gauze. The Eastern European delegation is leaving tomorrow, he said, not looking at me. His voice was raw, as if he hadn't used it in days. They were talking about exotic assets in the garden. They won't be talking anymore. I didn't ask you to do that, Damon. I stepped into the moonlight, my arms crossed over my chest. I have security. I have Sarah. I don't need. Your security catches people who break the rules. He finally turned his head. His eyes were hollow, filled with a desperate, human exhaustion that made him look almost mortal. I catch the people who don't care about rules. There are men here, Cashin, who would put a price on your son's head just to see if his blood is blue. His jaw tightened. I won't let them. I looked at his bandaged hands. He was an alpha playing a god's game, and it was taking a toll. He couldn't dive into my world. He couldn't breathe my air. And yet, he was trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. You're going to get yourself killed. Then let them come. He stood up, swaying slightly from fatigue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. He didn't step closer. He stayed exactly where Kalen had hissed at him. He set it on the wall and backed away. It was a custom-weighted, waterproof tracking device, sleek, expensive, clearly military grade. I can't follow you into the water, Cashin. A bitter, self-aware smile touched his lips. I'm just a man. I know that now. I know I can't reach the places you go. His gray eyes met mine. But if you ever go under, and you don't come back up, if someone traps you in those depths, he gestured to the device. Press the button. I'll be there. I'll find a way to reach you. Even if I have to drown to do it. I looked at the device. Then at the man who had once been my whole world. In my first life, I would have been moved by this. I would have seen it as a grand, romantic sacrifice. Proof that he had changed, that he loved me, that everything was going to be okay. But as I looked at the blood seeping through his bandages, I only saw the tragedy of his humanity. He was trying to protect a predator from the rain. Go to your room, Damon. My voice softened, just a fraction. Not out of love, but out of a chef's pity for a broken tool. You're bleeding on my herbs. I paused. And for the record, the Eastern Europeans weren't a threat. I already had the hotel manager increase the salinity in their private pool. They would have been too sick to walk by morning. Damon blinked. A flash of genuine surprise crossed his face. He looked at me, really looked at me, and realized that I wasn't just surviving. I was winning. You don't need me at all, do you? He whispered. I haven't needed you since the night I drove away. I picked up the device. I didn't throw it away. I put it in my pocket. But if you want to keep playing janitor, I won't stop you. Just don't expect to thank you when the floors are clean. I turned and walked back toward the villa. Behind me, I heard him exhale a long, shaky breath that carried the weight of everything he had lost. I didn't look back, but I also didn't tell him to leave. The shift in Damon was subtle at first, but for an Omega like me, attuned to the slightest change in the air and the scent of an alpha, it was deafening. He stopped the accidents. The shadows in the hallways grew less oppressive. He had realized that I didn't care for his displays of dominance. I was the one who held the crown here. So he traded his tactical gear for the tailored suits of a mourning husband. Every night he sat at the far corner table of Tide, table 12, the one with a direct view of the kitchen pass. He didn't order much, usually just black coffee or a glass of mineral water. But he sat there for hours, watching me lead, watching me command, watching me become the person I had always been meant to be. He was trying to learn the rhythm of my new life, trying to be present without being a threat. But his real focus was Kalen. During the afternoons, when the sun was high and the garden was quiet, Damon would sit on a stone bench, exactly 20 feet away from the fountain. He didn't reach out. He didn't call the boy's name. He just sat there, sometimes reading, sometimes just staring at the horizon, waiting. One afternoon, I watched from the kitchen window as Kalen stopped splashing. My son looked at Damon for a long time, his head tilted like a curious seal, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Then, slowly, Kalen picked up a smooth blue stone from the edge of the fountain. He waddled toward the invisible line I had drawn. Damon's whole body went rigid. He didn't breathe. He didn't move a muscle. Kalen dropped the stone, exactly 6 feet away from the alpha, and scurried back to the water. It was a test. A merman's way of marking territory, of saying, I see you. I don't trust you yet, But I see you. Damon didn't pick up the stone. He just looked at it. And I saw a single tear track down his bruised cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just whispered, so softly that I only heard it because of the wind. Thank you. But our peace was short-lived. 2 nights later, Kalen didn't want the water. Usually, he begged for his saltwater bath, splashing and giggling and refusing to get out until his fingers pruned. But when I tried to lower him into the tub that night, he screamed. Not in anger. In pain. That hurts. His skin was burning. A dry, angry red that looked like a rash but felt like a furnace. His small body was trembling, his breath coming in shallow, terrified gasps. Too dry, he whimpered, his small hands clawing at his chest. Too dry to that. My heart plummeted. I knew what this was. In the ancient scrolls of my people, the ones my mother had left me, the ones written on kelp paper in a language that tasted like salt, it was called the land fever. It happened to half-human children. When their 2 bloodlines fought for dominance during a growth spurt. His merman side needed the salt, but his human side was rejecting the transition. I tried everything. I hummed until my throat was raw. I packed him in wet linens. I held him under the saltwater tap until my arms ached. Nothing worked. By midnight, Kalen's fever was spiking to 104 degrees. His breathing was coming in shallow, terrifying gasps. His scales were emerging and retreating in erratic waves, silver and blue flickering across his skin like lightning. For the first time in 2 years, I felt the Ice King persona shatter. I was no longer the executive chef, the untouchable Omega who had built an empire from nothing. I was just a father, watching his child slip away in a world that wasn't built for him. I was huddled on the floor of the villa's bathroom, Kalen in my arms, when the sliding door creaked open. I didn't even have the strength to reach for a knife. Damon stepped in. He didn't have his gun. He had a medical kit and a bottle of specialized saline solution that he must have sourced from a black market contact, the kind of thing that wasn't available to civilians. Get away from us, I rasped, though my voice had no bite. Cashin, look at him. Damon's voice was steady, but filled with a terrifying urgency I had never heard from him before. His human heart is beating too fast for his merman lungs. You can't fix this with the ocean. He needs a human intervention to stabilize the rhythm. You don't know anything about him. I know biology, Cashin. He knelt beside us, ignoring my hiss of warning. He didn't try to take the boy. He simply opened the kit. I have a beta blocker. It'll slow his heart, just enough for the salt to take effect. If you don't let me do this, he's going to have a seizure. I looked at Kalen. His eyes were rolling back in his head. His small body was arching, the beginning of a spiral I had seen in dying mere people before. The dominant part of me, the Omega who had sworn never to trust this alpha again, wanted to fight him to the death. But the father realized I was out of my depth. For all my power in the kitchen and the sea, I was not a doctor. And Damon, for all his sins, was a man who knew exactly how to keep a body alive. If you hurt him, I whispered, my voice breaking, I will drown you. Slowly. I know. Damon moved with a clinical, detached grace. He didn't flinch as he found the tiny vein in Kalen's arm. He didn't look away from the boy's pale face. He administered the dose. And then, without being asked, he reached into the tub and began to hand-whisk the salt into the water, to the exact concentration Kalen needed. Slowly, agonizingly slowly. Kalen's breathing evened out. The angry red flush faded from his skin. His small hand, which had been clenched in a fist, softened, and came to rest on Damon's forearm. Damon froze. He looked down at the tiny hand resting against his skin. The skin he had spent a lifetime staining with blood. He didn't move. He stayed there, slumped against the side of the tub, letting our son use him for balance. I sat back against the cold tile, my chest heaving. I looked at the alpha who had abandoned me, the man I had sworn to hate forever, and realized that for the last 3 hours, he had been the only other person in the world who cared if Kalen breathed. He's stable, Damon whispered, not taking his eyes off the boy. He is. My voice was barely audible. I looked at Damon's bandaged hands, now wet with the salt water that Kaelin needed to survive. You can stay. Just for tonight. Until the fever breaks. Damon didn't say thank you. He just nodded and kept his arm still, serving as a human anchor for the child who didn't even know his name. The Ice King hadn't melted, but the fortress had a crack. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to fix it. The sun rose over the Atlantic in a bleed of bruised gold and soft pinks. I sat on the floor of the bathroom, my back against the cool porcelain of the tub, watching the light hit the steam rising from the salt water. Damon hadn't moved. He was still slumped against the side of the tub, his arms submerged in the cooling water, where Kaelin's hand still gripped his forearm. He looked older in the morning light, the shadows under his eyes deeper, the stubble on his jaw thick and gray-flecked. He had stayed awake all night, his eyes never leaving the digital pulse oximeter he had clipped to Kaelin's small toe. You should sleep, I said. My voice was a dry rasp, stripped of its usual command. Damon didn't look at me. He just adjusted the saline drip with his free hand. I've gone 4 days without sleep on missions, Cashin. I'm fine. This isn't a mission, isn't it? He finally turned his head. His gaze was heavy. It's the only one I've ever had that mattered. Before I could respond, Kaelin stirred. He let out a soft, tiny sigh, the kind of sound that usually preceded a morning splash. His eyes fluttered open, blinking against the soft bathroom light. I held my breath. In the past, this was the moment Kaelin would see Damon and scream. My hand moved instinctively to the floor, ready to scoop my son up and shield him from another rejection. But Kaelin didn't scream. He looked at the arm he was holding, followed the line of the bruised, bandaged skin up to Damon's face. Damon stayed perfectly still, his breathing shallow, looking like a man awaiting a death sentence. Kaelin reached out his other hand and touched the dark bruise on Damon's cheekbone. "Oh," he whispered. His voice was small, sweet, curious. I felt a sharp, physical ache in my chest. Kaelin wasn't sensing the assassin this morning. He was sensing the anchor, the man who had sat in the dark and held the fever at bay. Damon's eyes filled with tears. He didn't let them fall. He just leaned his face, just a fraction, into Kaelin's tiny palm. "It's okay, little one. It doesn't hurt anymore." Kaelin studied him for a long moment. Then, with the fickle attention span of a toddler, he closed his eyes again and leaned his head against Damon's wet shoulder. The silence that followed was heavy. I stood up, my joints popping, and reached for a dry towel. I have to get to the kitchen. Breakfast service for the summit starts in an hour. Sarah is outside. She'll take over here. Cashin. Damon's voice stopped me at the door. "Thank you for letting me stay." I paused. "Don't thank me yet." I didn't look back. The fever is gone, but the men who sent you here are still in my lobby. If you want to keep that safe feeling alive, you have a lot more than a fever to fight. I spent the morning in a blur of eggs Benedict and smoked salmon. But my mind was in the villa. I was supposed to be the one in control, the one who didn't need anyone. But the image of Kaelin's hand on Damon's arm kept playing on a loop in my head. I was realizing that a fortress is only strong if the people inside aren't starving for what's outside the walls. The message from the syndicate arrived during the mid-morning lull. I was in a walk-in freezer, checking the inventory of oyster crates, when I felt the temperature drop in a way that had nothing to do with the cooling units. I turned around and found a man standing in the doorway. He wasn't a chef. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit that cost more than my car, and he was holding a silencer-equipped pistol with a bored, professional ease. "Chef Elias Vane," the man said. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. Or should I say, Cashin. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Kale has been unresponsive to his comms. We were beginning to think he'd met with an accident. But seeing you..." He tilted his head. I think the accident was much more sentimental. I didn't move. I felt the iridescence begin to shimmer beneath my skin, my claws itching to break through, my omega instincts roaring to life. You're in the wrong kitchen. I don't think so. He raised the gun, pointed it directly at my heart. The syndicate wants its asset back. And since he won't listen to reason, we thought we'd provide a little motivation. His smile widened. Where is the boy? The mention of Kalen triggered something primal. My vision tunneled into a deep, predatory blue. I didn't care about the gun. I was a siren. An Omega who had survived abandonment, pregnancy, and birth alone. And this man was standing in my hunting grounds. You should have stayed in the lobby. My voice dropped into that terrifying subsonic frequency, the one that made glass vibrate and heart stutter. The man never finished his sentence. A shadow blurred behind him. A hand, wrapped in blood-stained gauze, reached around and gripped the man's throat. Another hand seized the gun, snapping the man's wrist with a sickening pop. Damon didn't look like a father now. He looked like a demon. He slammed the man against the freezer wall, the sound of metal buckling echoing through the small space. His gray eyes were murderous, a dark, bottomless void. You don't talk to him. Damon's voice was a jagged edge. You don't look at him. He leaned in close, his lips brushing the man's ear. And if you even think the name of the child, I will peel the skin from your bones while you're still breathing. Damon, go to the villa, Cashin. Damon didn't take his eyes off his prey. He looked over his shoulder at me, and for a second I saw the man who had saved Kalen last night, and the man who had killed for the syndicate for a decade. They were the same man. Take Kalen and Sarah to the cove. Stay in the water until I come for you. Are there more of them? There are always more. Damon's grip tightened, until the man in the gray suit began to turn blue. But they have to get through me first. And I'm not leaving this door a second time. I nodded. I grabbed my knife roll, and I sprinted. Burst into the villa. Kalen was still groggy from the fever break, curled in Sarah's lap, wrapped in a soft blanket. His eyes were half closed, his small body limp with exhaustion. But the moment he saw my face, saw the panic I couldn't hide, he stiffened. Dada, we're going swimming, little shark. I scooped him into my arms. His small hands fisted in my shirt. No. Sarah was already standing by the window, a suppressed submachine gun in her hands. She didn't need instructions. She had seen the black vans pulling into the service entrance. The cove, Sarah, I commanded. My voice vibrated with a frequency that made the glass windows rattle. Hold the cliff's side. If anything moves, that isn't Damon or me. Sink it. On it, chef. Her eyes were hard. I sprinted toward the back of the property, where the garden dropped off into a jagged, hidden staircase carved into the limestone. The air was screaming with the sound of distant gunfire. Damon was already making his stand at the main gate. The land war had begun. I reached the water's edge and didn't stop. I walked straight into the crashing surf, Kalen's small arms tightening around my neck. Daddy cold, he whimpered, shivering as the Atlantic foam sprayed his face. No, little shark. I held him close. It's home. I dove. The moment we submerged, the world of noise and fire vanished. It was replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the deep, the pulse of the ocean, the heartbeat of my people. I felt the transformation take me like a violent rush of adrenaline. My legs fused into a powerful midnight blue tail. My lungs expanded, filtering oxygen from the salt. My vision sharpened, the darkness of the deep becoming as clear as daylight. Beside me, Kalen's transformation was even faster. Freed from the constraints of his land fever, his small body shimmered. His legs vanished, replaced by a sleek, iridescent tail that moved with instinctive grace. His scales emerged, not the patchy, fevered remnants from last night, but full and bright, catching the faint light from the surface like scattered stars. For the first time in his life, Kalen was fully himself. He let out a burst of bubbles that sounded like a laugh, darting through a kelp forest with a speed no human could track. His small, sharp teeth gleamed in the darkness. Dada. Fast. I see you, little shark. But the peace lasted only seconds. A sharp, artificial ping echoed through the water. Sonar. I looked up. Shadows were cutting through the surface. Divers and high-tech rebreathers, armed with harpoon rifles and underwater propulsion vehicles. The syndicate wasn't just coming for a retired asset. They wanted the exotic secret Damon had been guarding. They wanted us. I felt the iridescence in my skin turn into a blinding, predatory silver. I was no longer the Omega who plated delicate sea bass for billionaires. I was a siren. And these men were trespassing in my temple. Kalen, hide. In the crevice. Don't come out until I come for you. Dada. No. He obeyed, his wide, dark eyes watching me as he tucked himself into a narrow crack in the reef. I turned to face the intruders. The first diver aimed his harpoon. I didn't wait for him to fire. I moved through the water like a bolt of lightning, my tail providing a burst of speed that defied physics, that couldn't be real, that made the divers' eyes go wide with terror behind their masks. I didn't need a weapon. My hands were enough. My fingernails, now hardened into obsidian-sharp claws, shredded the diver's oxygen line before he could blink. He panicked, bubbles erupting from his mask as he fought to rise. I didn't let him. I grabbed his weighted belt and dragged him deeper, down into the darkness, where the pressure would do the rest of the work. Above me, through the shimmering surface, I could see flashes of light. The land war. Damon was up there, a lone silhouette on the cliff's edge, holding back a tide of men with the cold, mechanical precision of a machine. I could hear the muffled thud-thud-thud of grenades, the rhythmic chatter of his rifle. He was fighting for every inch of land, so I could have every inch of the sea. 3 more divers converged on me, forming a triangle, their harpoons aimed at my chest. They fired simultaneously. I spun, my body a blur of silver and blue. 2 harpoons whistled past, embedding themselves in the reef behind me. But the third grazed my shoulder, drawing a line of dark, shimmering blood. The scent of my own blood triggered the siren's frenzy. I opened my mouth and screamed. It wasn't a sound, not really. It was a subsonic shriek, a frequency so low and so powerful that it shattered the glass of their masks. The divers clutched their ears, their bodies convulsing as the vibration tore through their internal organs. I moved between them, a shadow of death. A throat crushed here. A regulator ripped away there. A tail slamming into a chest with enough force to crack ribs. I was the executive chef of Tide, and I was currently preparing a feast for the bottom feeders. By the time the last diver was drifting toward the abyss, the water was silent again. I swam back to the crevice and pulled Kalen into my arms. He wasn't crying. He was looking at the carnage with calm, predatory curiosity. He was my son through and through. Good boy, I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. You stayed hidden. You did so good. Dad has blood, he said, touching my shoulder. It's nothing, little shark. Just a scratch. I looked up toward the surface. The gunfire on the cliffs had slowed to a sporadic crawl. Then a massive explosion rocked the shoreline. The hotel's fuel depot. A single figure tumbled from the cliffside, silhouetted against the fire, falling like a stone. Damon. He hit the water with a heavy splash, his body limp, trailing a cloud of red that bloomed through the salt like a dark flower. He had held the line, until there was no line left to hold. He was sinking, and as a man who had never learned to swim, he was finally entering the one world where his guns and his shadows meant nothing. I surged toward him, my heart hammering against my ribs. You don't get to die yet, Damon Kale, I thought, my claws retracting as I reached for him. I haven't finished making you pay. I caught him 50 feet down. His lungs were already beginning to fill with the cold Atlantic, his body jerking in that primal, drowning panic. His gray eyes were open, but unfocused, staring at nothing. I pressed my lips to his, and breathed. Not air life. The oxygen from my own Merman lungs, forced into his human body. The siren's kiss, the kind that had been written about in myths, the kind that could buy a drowning man a few more minutes of life. Damon's eyes focused on mine. What? Shattered. Cass, don't talk. I broke the surface, dragging his heavy, unconscious body toward the hidden sands of our cove. The water was churning, debris from the explosion floating everywhere, the acrid smell of smoke mixing with the salt. Sarah was there, bloodied but standing, her gun smoking in the moonlight. Is it over? She rasped, helping me haul Damon onto the sand. The land is clear. I looked up at the burning ruins of the hotel above us. Sirens were wailing in the distance, emergency vehicles, police, the inevitable investigation. I looked down at Damon. He was coughing up salt water, his body heaving, his hands scrabbling at the sand. His eyes flickered open, finding mine. And then he saw Kalen. Kalen had crawled out of the surf, his tail shimmering in the moonlight before it faded back into two small human legs. He was naked and shivering and perfect. You saved me, Damon whispered. His voice was a ghost of a sound. Consider it a loan. My voice was as hard as the reef. You still owe me a lifetime of groveling. And the breakfast service starts in 4 hours. The silence after the explosion was worse than the noise. The Azure's East Wing was a blackened skeleton. The luxury resort was now a crime scene, crawling with federal agents and terrified board members. I stood in the lobby of a secondary hotel down the coast, my chef's whites stained with salt and Damon's blood, facing the 3 owners of the hotel group. The summit was a disaster, Elias. The lead investor was pacing the private suite, his face red with fury. Men are dead. Our reputation is in ashes. Why shouldn't we fire you and hand everything over to the authorities? I didn't blink. I looked at them with the same cold clarity I used to deconstruct a complex sauce. You won't fire me. I stepped forward. Because I am the only reason your insurance claim will hold. I have the logs of the security breaches. I have the names of the guests who brought this war to your doorstep. And most importantly, I leaned in, my voice dropping into that low, resonant frequency that made the water in their glasses tremble. I am the only one who can reopen this kitchen and bring the elite back. Once the smoke clears, I straightened up. You provide the capital for the rebuild. I provide the miracle. And from now on, my villa and the North Garden are off limits to all hotel staff and security. I will manage my own perimeter. They traded looks. They were businessmen. They knew that a disgraced hotel with a legendary chef was still worth more than an empty lot. Fine, the lead said. But your security consultant, the one who caused the shootout, he stays away from the public eye. He isn't a consultant. I turned to leave. He's a ghost. And ghosts are only seen when they want to be. While I fought the board, Damon was fighting a different war. He spent the next 2 weeks in the shadows of the coastal town, finishing what he had started at the cove. He didn't tell me the details. I didn't ask, but I saw the results. The black van stopped appearing. The syndicate's chatter on the dark web went silent. The men who had come hunting for us simply vanished. He was using his retirement to burn every bridge that could lead back to Kalen. In the midst of the chaos, Kalen was the one who changed the most. He had seen Damon bleed for him, had felt Damon's human warmth in the bathtub when the fever broke, had watched the Alpha fight and fall to protect them. One afternoon, while I was reviewing blueprints in a temporary villa, I found Kalen sitting by the glass door, staring at the empty garden. He wasn't playing with his shells. He wasn't splashing in his little pool. He was holding a small silver button, one that had been torn from Damon's tactical vest during the fight. Dada. He looked up at me, his blue-gray eyes wide. Alpha come back? My heart did a slow, painful roll. I had spent so long trying to protect Kalen from Damon, had built walls around him, around us to keep the Alpha out. But I hadn't realized. Kalen had started to need him. I was the sea, but every merman needs a shore to rest on. That night, Damon returned. He didn't come through the front door. He appeared on the balcony, looking exhausted, his clothes tattered, his spirit spent. He looked like he expected me to throw him out. Instead, I stepped aside. Kalen's been asking for you. Damon's face transformed. The lethal coldness vanished, replaced by a raw, desperate hope. He walked into the living room, moving slowly, carefully, like a man approaching a wounded animal. Kalen was sitting on the floor, building a tower of blocks. He looked up, and his whole face lit up. Alpha. Kalen scrambled to his feet, small legs moving as fast as they could, and collided with Damon's chest. He buried his face in the Alpha's neck, his small arms wrapping around Damon's throat. Damon closed his eyes. His large, scarred hands trembled as he wrapped them around our son. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here, little one. I'm here." I watched them from the kitchen doorway, a strange sense of peace finally settling over me. The hotel was a mess. My career was in a delicate balance. And the Alpha I had loved, the one I had sworn to hate forever, was standing in my living room, holding my son like he was something precious. But for the first time in 2 lives, the 3 of us were under the same roof, without a secret between us. The rebuild took 6 months. But the villa was finished first. It was a masterpiece of stone and glass, built directly into the cliffside, with windows that faced the open ocean and a private staircase that led down to the hidden cove. Damon had officially retired. His name was scrubbed from every database that mattered. Courtesy of favors called in, alliances burned, and at least 3 men who would never threaten anyone again. To the hotel board, he was my private security, a silent, imposing figure who was never seen in the dining room, but was always felt. We moved into the villa together on a night when the moon was full and the tide was high. After Kalen was tucked into his new bed, a custom-built room with a direct view of the ocean, I found Damon on the terrace. He was looking out at the water, the breeze ruffling his dark hair. "It's quiet," he said as I approached. "It's over." I reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm. His grip was steady. "Is it?" he asked, his gray eyes finding mine. I didn't answer with words. I led him inside, away from the moonlight and into the soft, warm glow of our bedroom. There were no words needed. This wasn't the frantic, desperate reunion of the Cove, nor was it the bitter power play of my office. As we moved toward the bed, it was a slow, deliberate choice. The air in the bedroom was heavy with the scent of the sea and the warmth of the hearth, a cocoon of safety we had fought a war to earn. I pushed the shirt from Damon's shoulders. The fabric slid away to reveal the rugged landscape of his chest, the scars, old and new, that mapped his history. My fingers traced the new ones, angry, jagged marks from the cliffside battle. They mingled with the faded white lines of his past, a history written in skin and sacrifice. I didn't flinch at the sight of them. I leaned in and pressed my lips to a mark just above his heart, feeling the steady, thundering pulse beneath. Damon let out a shuddering breath, his hands coming up to frame my face. He touched me with a reverence that bordered on worship, his thumbs tracing the line of my jaw, his palms sliding down to the curve of my throat. He moved as if he were memorizing a prayer. His touch was light, but possessive, trailing down the line of my ribs, where my skin still held the faint, iridescent shimmer of the tide. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured, his voice a rough vibration against my skin. "When I hit the water, I thought." "You didn't." I pulled him closer. "You're here." When we finally came together, sinking back into the soft silk of the sheets, it was the first time in either life that it felt truly equal. There was no assassin and his secret, no broken Omega and his savior. There was just Damon and Cashin, 2 halves of a shattered world, finally slotting into place. He kissed me with a tenderness that made my breath hitch, his lips moving against mine in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It wasn't the frantic hunger of our past. It was a soft, lingering promise, a vow kept in every brush of his mouth against mine. I ran my hands down the broad expanse of his back, pulling him closer, until there was no space left for ghosts or regrets. As our bodies moved in a fluid, instinctive harmony, my legs tangling with his, grounding us both, I felt the last of the ice around my heart finally melt away. replaced by a heat that radiated from his skin to mine. Every touch was an acknowledgement of who we had become, no longer the hunter and the prey, but the shore and the sea. In the quiet intensity of the moment, Damon leaned his forehead against mine. His gray eyes searched mine with a raw, vulnerable honesty. "I have you," he whispered. "I finally have you. You never lost me." I breathed, pulling him back down into another kiss. "You just had to learn how to hold me." We drifted into the night, not as a tragedy, but as a living, breathing testament to survival. As the sound of the Atlantic pulsed against the cliffs below, I fell asleep with my head on Damon's chest, the rhythm of his breathing a perfect match for the tide. We were no longer adrift. We were home, then.